Late in February 2026, the global logistics network watched 20% of the world's seaborne oil trade come to a dead stop. On April 8th, that logistical paralysis meant a violent financial reversal. Brent crude futures crashed by 6% in a single day, hitting their lower circuit limits. This chart tracks the velocity of that correction. After peaking at $126 per barrel, prices plummeted back to the $100 level in a matter of hours. The driver for this market relief was the announcement of a 14-day military ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Global stock markets immediately priced in a best-case scenario, assuming the Strait of Hormuz would rapidly reopen for commercial traffic. But this financial optimism is currently detached from the physical reality of the infrastructure on the ground, much of which remains inoperable. At the same time, the Lebanon Exception ensures that the regional conflict remains fully active on its most volatile northern front. The April 8th agreement acts as a temporary pressure valve for global supply chains, buying time for markets while leaving the core geopolitical drivers of the crisis untouched. This model illustrates the physical capacity of the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil must pass through a waterway just 34 kilometers wide. Managing that volume requires protection and indemnity insurance, specifically war risk coverage for maritime shipping. When insurers withdrew that coverage in early March, they created an effective blockade. Without the need for a physical military boarding, the economic risk alone was enough to halt all transit. Global oil prices responded by surging faster than they did during the 1990 Gulf War or the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. In response, the International Energy Agency attempted to flood the market, coordinating a record 400 million barrel release from emergency strategic reserves. It was the largest intervention in history, and it completely failed to stop the price spike. Agent-based maritime transport models explain why these financial reserves couldn't stop the surge. These simulations track how schedule delays begin cascading outward from the Gulf. Once a choke point closes, the resulting bottlenecks spread to every major port in Asia and Europe. The data identifies a 4-week threshold. Beyond this point, logistical delays accumulate so rapidly that the global supply chain enters an exponential, unrecoverable failure. Strategic reserves are a financial tool, but they cannot fix a physical logistical node. When the strait is blocked, the physics of the delivery network dictate the price. The supply chain for crude oil is distinct from the far more specialized infrastructure required for natural gas. During the initial escalation, Iranian strikes specifically targeted Qatar's industrial gas complex at Ras Laffan. Those strikes physically destroyed 2 liquefied natural gas trains and a gas-to-liquids facility. This removed 12.8 million metric tons of export capacity, effectively erasing 17% of Qatar's total output from the global market. Qatar Energy responded by invoking force majeure, a legal declaration that allowed them to break their long-term supply contracts. This Sankey diagram illustrates the resulting geographic crisis. Asian economies are the primary destination for Qatar LNG, relying on the Gulf for over 80% of their supply. Severing 17% of that flow forced these nations to compete fiercely for a limited number of replacement cargoes. The Japan-Korea marker, the benchmark for Asian gas prices, rocketed upward by 50% to exceed $20 per unit. To prevent total blackouts, Asian utilities were forced into a systemic pivot back to coal generation, reversing years of energy policy in mere weeks. While crude oil shipping can resume almost immediately after a truce, the LNG deficit is a structural shock. The damage at Ras Laffan has decoupled the two energy markets for at least the next 3 years. The active front lines in the Levant represent a distinct geographic risk to the current ceasefire. Israel's Lebanon Exception explicitly states that Lebanese territory is not included in the terms of the 14-day agreement. Nominal cessation of hostilities deals have existed here since late 2024, yet daily IDF drone and airstrikes have continued regardless. This heat map illustrates the density of destruction in southern Lebanon, where over 3,600 buildings were reduced to rubble in a single 2-week window. United Nations monitors have verified the resulting human cost, over 4,000 casualties and the internal displacement of 1.4 million people. This ongoing conflict in the north leaves the fragile U.S.-Iran economic truce vulnerable to a sudden, violent collapse. The 14-day pause is a geo-economic pact designed to unfreeze capital, and it remains entirely divorced from humanitarian conflict resolution. The 14-day pause was engineered through a complex diplomatic matrix that defied the expectations of most regional analysts. Pakistan acted as the primary mediator. Islamabad was driven by its own internal economic crisis and the threat of being pulled into a regional war through its defense pact with Saudi Arabia. General Asim Munir held a unique position in the talks, maintaining simultaneous ties to the Trump administration and the leadership of Iran's Revolutionary Guards. But Pakistan lacked the ability to guarantee the physical safety of Iranian negotiators, a requirement that nearly stalled the process. China, exposed to the same massive energy shocks, intervened as the indispensable guarantor of the deal. Beijing provided the direct security assurances that convinced Iranian diplomats to travel to Islamabad for the final talks. The final terms established a 14-day military pause and the opening of transit corridors for stalled merchant vessels. Economic attrition and the intervention of exposed third parties dictated the terms of this truce.